The second tip I want to share with you is when it comes to improving your bluffing game, right? And I want to share two spots with you that help you illustrate what are good spots to bluff in and what are bad spots to bluff in. We're not going to be diving here into some sophisticated PO sims or PO solvers. No, we're just going to be trying to approach it from a more logical standpoint, a little bit more generic. I also like these kind of videos a lot. I think they will help you also a lot. In other videos, we can then dive again into some PO sims and be a little bit more precise with what kind of combos. This is more about the mindset here. This is about trying to open your eyes and hopefully give you a little push, maybe in a different direction to help you also, gain an edge in certain spots that you probably have not seen it, as I'm trying to share that in that video. So as you know, people hate folding, and I want to give you a rule of thumb when it comes to bluffing in big pots. Spots that I try to avoid bluffing in spots is where my opponents have a strong absolute hand range. That is very important, absolute hand range. Or absolute range. So let's take the spot for example, where I open from the hijack and the big blind defense, and we're around 40 big blinds deep, and the board comes King 7-3 rainbow. We see bet 1/3. He calls. Turn is a blank. Let's say a deuce. He checks, we bet pot. River is, let's say, a 9. Just a very dry run out, a very typical static board. Nothing's too fancy. And then, we have options to bluff. Don't really want to talk about specific hands, just in general how I would approach the spots and how I differentiate between different board textures according to my experience. Of course, I deviate also here from GTO because I try to consider what people do in real life and what are the mistakes that we want to take advantage on. So would I be bluffing here a lot? No, of course I wouldn't. Why? Because he's supposed to start folding some King X on the river. Especially when we use a larger sizing, maybe 80%, 90%, 100% pot size, or slightly over pot size, which people rarely do. And once they call the turn, it's very likely that he has a king. First of all, he's not going to have a lot of deuce X hands. He's not going to have a lot of 3X hands that he's calling pre-flop. He's going to call these on the flop, of course, if he has something like 10-3 suited, but he's most likely going to be folding these on the turn. So he's mostly having a few 7X hands. They're not really like ace-high draws possible. He's not going to be calling, of course, he's calling some 7X hands, but his range is very King X heavy. So now a lot of his King X become like bottom of the range. And in fact, some 7X hands might be better bluff catchers than some of the King X hands. So people then still will call some 7X, but they will call majority of their King X. So the way people approach this spot is they think, oh, well, I have top pair, I have a strong hand. Well, in terms of the absolute hand strength, yes, top pair is good, right? In terms of the hand ranking, that's how people think, well, I have a top pair here. I didn't raise on the previous, I raised my 2-pair sets on earlier streets, so I have to call it down, right? This is how a lot of people think. And then their curiosity, especially lower stakes, mid stakes, and also this is more applicable for the early stages of the tournament. People have a hard time folding those. So especially when they can re-enter. So these are the spots you should really try to stay away from. And if they would think in relative hand strength, then they would realize that given the line that the King X, the top pair, is not so strong anymore. And this is just where you have to be very careful. Even if you calling to GTO and you look at the solver and you would find that your ace-4 or your queen-jack is it shows you it's supposed to be bluff. Again, it only considers chip EV. If you consider the fact that the ICM impact, same as in the first tip, then these marginal plus EV bluffs will actually be minus EV, and we want to heavily underbluff these spots according to the way population plays. So those are the spots where, especially very static boards, where very often the top pair on the flop remains the top pair on the river, dry ace-high, king-high, queen-high boards, where it's very likely once he calls the turn against the large sizing again, he's going to be having one of these top pairs very frequently. I would stay away from bluffing these spots, especially on low stakes and probably even on mid stakes. I always say, and you might have heard it from me a lot in the course, don't try to bluff people off top pairs. It has helped me a lot and probably saved me a lot of money on lower mid stakes. I mean, I still run my stupid bluffs and I hate myself afterwards, but this is what I can share you here from my experience. Let's take the same spot and change the board texture, which I think is then a good spot to bluff, which would be, let's say, King 7-6 suited. There's a flush draw. Turn is a 9. and river jack. So let's say you have king in clubs, 7 in clubs, and 6 in spades, whatever, and jack and 9, whatever kind of suits. You see here that once we barrel the turn, he will have way more weaker hands coming to the river with, right? He's going to have like pair and an open-8 straight draw, pair and a flush draw. You can have hands like 9-8, 7-8, and so on and so forth. And also, given that the board is relatively wet, he's going to be fast playing his 2 pairs, sets, or whatever more often on the turn. Right, on the previous board, he's incentivized, or he probably is going to feel that more often he will be slow playing a hand because the board is dry, it doesn't need a lot of protection, especially if you have maybe a little more aggressive image. So there, on the second board, he will also not have as 2 pair of sets as often as in the previous board. So on the river, he comes, he's going to have way more pair in a draw, second, third pair, fourth pair in a draw, maybe an ace high, queen high flush draw. So there, bluffing your queen high, your 10 high is way more appealing. He's going to be having way more call, also call flop, call turn, fold hands on the river than in the previous spot. So it's way more attractive to bluff here, since he's going to have more snap folds than in the previous board. And also, we can manipulate his folding range a little bit more by choosing a smaller sizing. So very often the people, fold exactly the same amount of hands against the 60% sizing, and then same as against like a 75 or 80% sizing, where we can of course take advantage of that and give ourselves a much better price and maybe bluff half pot or 66% pot. We only try to target those second, third, fourth pairs, ace high, queen high flush draws with our jack highs, 10 highs that we're trying to bluff, or even just an ace high. We can still be very aggressive. I mean, since we bet the flop, we bet the turn, we still have all the 2 pairs, top pairs, sets. You should also be value betting something like king, queen. I mean, this is a spot where, of course, you should never fold a top pair, but since we're also going to be having a lot of draws ourselves. But there, people don't understand that actually here, since we can have so many bluffs, it's so much better to maybe sometimes hero call something like 7-8 or, the 10-9 type of hands. But this is where people just don't have this understanding of how the ranges interact with the boards, the board run out, and also how a preflop range interacts with the board, especially when you play against beginners, if you play against recreationals. But I see also like regulars massively overcalling these static boards, and then they never find these bluff catchers, these hero calls in the second spot. But just think about it, when you have a flush draw there, you have all the fourth pairs in the flush draw, ace high flush draws, and sometimes you have to call down there over second and third pair way more often than in the previous spot. Keep that in mind. And this exploit is very important when it comes to crushing low and mid stakes, of course. It doesn't take hours of studying. It just takes some shutting the fuck up and listening and applying it, and then marking these spots, revisiting them, looking them over if you have applied it correctly, and then of course opening a pyrosim or whatever kind of tool you're using, looking it up if what you did makes sense, or posting a hand in a forum or Discord asking for feedback. This is how you evolve as a poker player, and this is how you learn new concepts, and this is a very important tip. And it's also very important to do some note looking. For example, in the first spot, if you think people aren't folding the top pairs as much as the solver wants them to fold, then let them call more top pairs and see how little you start bluffing. And on the second spot, if you think people fold more often on the river, then adjust those ranges, note look it, and then see how much we're suddenly supposed to be bluffing. And then of course it becomes way more profitable, right? And this is then where we are also good with these huge bluffs in these spots, because it generates a decent profit, even if we consider ICM in future game. And then you will also realize that in the first spot, it's probably really stupid to find those bluffs because people are not capable of folding top pairs.